Well, we're here to both celebrate and discuss Mike Oldfield's Amarok, one of the most revered and polarizing recordings of his catalog, and it's celebrating its 35th anniversary this year. Today we have Chris Dewey, who's the author of the book Mike Oldfield, A Life Dedicated to Music, and the editor of Dark Star, the long-running Mike Oldfield magazine. And we also have Markus Reuter, who's a world-renowned touch guitarist and composer, and is part of Stickmen and Tuner. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Neil.
Well, let's start with you, Chris. Describe where Mike Oldfield was with his career in 1989 when he first conceived Amarok.
Well, it was quite an interesting place. I mean, he was obviously getting towards the end of his Virgin years. He was getting disillusioned. He felt that people had moved on from the record company, and the people that were there didn't really have a great interest or even understand his style of music. And he was frustrated, so he was kind of ready to move on. But he had three albums left to make. So he had Earth Moving, Amarok, Heavens Open, all came out in the space of really about just about a 2 year period, and he really raced through those. So he was just doing that. And interesting that Amarok is one of those, but he raced through those purely to fulfill his contract. So he was in a bit of a frustrated, angry state, um, feeling a little bit cantankerous towards them, and I think that influenced how he worked over those albums.
Well, how would you describe the original intention for Amarok and then what it ultimately transformed into, Chris?
I think it's surprising and perhaps disappointing actually that the original intention was just that to finish the contract. So, a lot of people really revere Amarok and hold it up as a great masterpiece, which I agree with. But to him, it was really just a task to complete to finish that contract. There was an element of inspiration. He did some live sessions on the BBC Radio 1 show with a DJ called Nicky Gamble. And he went into the studio and he took also all his instruments and he played a 7 minute section of Tubular Bells, and he played some other songs as well, three songs he played. And the engineers in the studio were amazed at how he'd gone in with real instruments and played real music. And that kind of inspired him to make an album in that way as well. So I think it was quite unusual what he was doing, mostly playing real hand played live instruments, and that was definitely an inspiration to him, that Radio 1 session that he did. Um, uh, Last thing, I suppose, Tom Newman, we know, was the producer on that album. He's recently released his autobiography, which has got some great stories in it. One of them about Amarok. He says that he constantly had to remind Mike to strive for something special. So Mike, he says, wasn't particularly motivated, wasn't particularly interested day to day. He just wanted to throw out a bit of music each day as it came to him. And Tom feels that he had a fair amount of input in stretching Mike a little bit.
Now, for a contractual obligation record, this is a 60-minute piece of music that is really absolutely brilliant in its construction. Marcus, talk about what Amarok actually is. What kind of listening experience did Mike create here?
Ooh, that's a very big question because I think it's different for every single individual that listens to it, right? I think it's just so rich, has so many sections. I haven't counted them. Maybe Chris knows how many there are, but it's I think first of all, it feels like a collage, much more so than any other of his albums. And he is also like citing a lot of themes from his back catalog in this record. Um, like for me, the most striking thing about it in hindsight is that it seems like, and I have to say this from like the position of a composer, it seems like he has sort of streamlined his compositional process in order to make this record possible. Um, there are so many technical challenges just even doing this. Not even speaking of compositional challenges, and like the compositional challenges are that he sort of went for simpler source material that he Like a lot of people who don't really get Amarok, they don't understand that this record is just like Amarok or Tubular Bells for that matter, even, or Just Rich, where it's a thematic um, kind of composition with sort of like a classical treatment, classical music treatment of the themes. And but here it's really presented in sort of like a very contemporary, not for the time, I would say even for today. It's sort of like a record that has glitches in it. The way it's put together is just so futuristic, and at the time it really sounded like a little bit heavy-handed. But I don't think it ever was that. It was just that the listener wasn't prepared for this kind of onslaught of musical genius.
Well, it's a dramatic record with these mercurial peaks, loud stabs, crashing, banging. Um, and yet it's somehow, at least for me as a listener, still feels very seamless, which
Mhm.
I realize a lot of people disagree with. Chris and Marcus, what are your thoughts about how it all flows together?
I think it's interesting that the way Mike recorded this. So Tom Newman was living directly across the road in a flat. They used to go in together every morning at 9 till 6, just spend the day recording what came to them. So that it consciously was not composed. It was almost like an improvisation. So it's very raw. It's just a kind of splurge of what was in Mike's mind that day. And that you can kind of tell those day-to-day jumps. So one day to the next day has a different style. And it has all these parts that don't easily fit together. And I think that's why it's quite challenging as a first listen. And a lot of people don't like it. Even some of the die-high fans really don't like it for that reason. It jumps about a lot. But once you get used to that, then I feel it's a fantastic piece. But yeah, definitely does. It just is an uneasy first listen, definitely.
Yeah, and I want to add that I agree that, say, in terms of stylistic jumps, right? Like that's what it is, but thematically, musically, it's not like that. Everything is interconnected from the very beginning. We get, introductions of themes, and they always reappear, even from the second section onward. So I obviously I don't know, Chris, if you've met Mike. I haven't, so I have no idea how consciously he's working as a composer. But I can tell you, as a sort of from a musicologist point of view, that the way that these compositions are structured, there seems to be, I say, it seems to be at least a subconscious understanding of what the final thing is going to be. Like the way that the themes are being, how shall I say, introduced, lends the themes to be recombined in like mosaic kind of style, let's say. And that is something that just doesn't, that this only kind of happens if you're like genius level talented, let's say, and it can happen subconsciously, or you're actually somebody who's worked on their craft, and so like I agree. And also for me, it was a difficult listen. I bought it the day it came out. Don't even remember which day that was when I got it, a Tuesday, I think. Like for some reason, like these kind of feelings, like, or it still persists with me. Um, and yeah, it has had not been as a whole experience. It has never been my favorite. Um, but nowadays, again, in hindsight, me being older and wiser, um, listening to the whole thing, I sometimes listen just to the left channel of it, sometimes just the right channel of the stereo, just to get like these all to learn about all the intricacies. It's wonderful.
So, Chris,
I think that's key. That's, I mean, you talk about the word genius. I think that label applies here because without even really trying and without feeling motivated, he's
Mhm.
still managed to kind of just always throw out this improvised piece that still has such depth and layers, which other people would struggle to sit and write. People would spend 10 years trying to write something like that, but it just kind of fell out of him, and that, I think genius applies definitely.
Mhm.
what do we know about the compositional process with Tom Newman? Was it, a series of modules that were then put together, or was there any linearity in terms of the day-to-day process of bringing this together?
I mean, that's my understanding, that they would just go into the studio each day and record what they felt like there and then. Tom says he stretched Mike. Um, I think Mike by that stage had become very competent technically, and obviously musically knew where he wanted to be as well. So Tom's influence was significant, but I think Mike was quite strong-willed, and it kind of raises the importance of a good producer. A good producer can stretch an artist, and I think any artist, Mike included. But I think that Mike was still quite strong-willed by that point and decided, no, this is what I want to do, and was quite happy to say, no, I'm not doing whatever you suggest, Tom, and just do his own thing. But it really was, as I understand it, just a sort of day-by-day improvised output. Just here we go. Let's just do what we're doing today and move on.
I think what may explain the way the record came out in the end is that there is some sort of accumulative effect of working on something in a almost like a in a factory, like going to work, like you said, Chris, like from 6 or from 9 to 6, right? For some reason, that doing it that way, but you can't help but remember the things you did the other day. And it's sort of like the whole structure then builds on the fact that you've chosen a particular process. And maybe that's what we're hearing and referring to when we actually understand that this is not just a collection of ideas that have nothing to do with each other, but something that is sort of referencing itself.
Almost subconsciously, yeah.
Subconsciously,
Yeah,
exactly. I think so.
Well, now today with Pro Tools or Logic, this album could have been assembled much easier than with the technology Mike was using back in 1989. Markus, perhaps you can talk about the technical complexity of putting a record like this together back in the late 80s.
Well, I can tell you that even nowadays, it would be a huge undertaking to do this. The recording is one thing, just like the sheer hours that you have to invest into something, especially if it's played by hand, mostly played by hand, recorded, like you have to like either fix performances, and back in that at that time you wouldn't really fix things that much. You would replay it, and yeah, it's going to just take a lot of time. Like what is the most striking thing for me is how amazing the mix is. The logistics of making a mix like that, that is something that even nowadays is ridiculously difficult. So I remember like one of my records called Face with Pat Mastelotto, which kind of is closest in the idea to Amarok. Um, uh, it with Pro Tools, because you asked about that, Anil, because that was mixed in Pro Tools, right? You have automation, you have everything on screen, you can change all the levels, like every section can be completely different. And because it's all in one session, you have everything in front of you visually, and you can listen to transitions. It's easier to do, right? And still it's a nightmare. And back then, and this is something that maybe Tom could answer really, is like, did they really just mix sections, short sections, and then splice them together? Um, or were kind of like sections on the multi-track spliced together? And that would make a big difference. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, it would be easier nowadays, but still nobody's going to do that, because the general idea these days is still to make things easier on yourself rather than harder. And that's something that we really have to give Mike and Tom credit for, that they really worked hard on this record.
Well, Chris, what can you tell us about the recording environment for this record?
it was very simple. So they had a 48 track Sony digital tape recorder. They'd go in, as I say, each day 9 till 6, and just sit there and record what came to them that day. So it was recorded directly to the 48 track. I mean, that's interesting in itself, actually, because we talked about this the other week, Anil, and I've checked into this. The recording technology they used was pretty much the same sampling rate and bit depth as the CD format. So there's been talk about, maybe there could have been a high res issue of this album, but it's not. It doesn't exist. There is no higher resolution or deeper bit depth. No, that's it. That's the CD is pretty much a bit accurate rendition of what was recorded. And I don't think they did spend a long time mixing it. I think it was obviously they would have done that at the end of the process, but I think it really was a really fast get this album down, get it out, and get that contract done. And it's disappointing and sad to say that because of what it is and what it stands for a lot of fans, but I think that's the reality.
Well, there are other musicians on this record. Discuss some of the key players and what they contributed, Chris.
Well, so there are a lot of people that came back from the kind of listings from Omadorn, so Mike's third album, and he kind of intended this in a way as a bit of a second Omadorn. And you had people like Clodagh Simmons. You had Paddy Maloney playing the Uilleann pipes and the tin whistle. Jabula obviously played the drums in Omadorn, a key part of Omadorn. They came back and played drums on Amarok as well. So there was a lot of crossover with the musicians that were on Omadorn. And then his friend William Murray, that was also involved first time round, came and wrote the sleeve notes for Amarok. So there was a real connection between Omadorn, and I think that frustrated Virgin as well, because they really wanted to call this Tubular Bells Part 2, number 2, something along those lines, and Mike flatly refused that. And that did irritate them, because they were looking at the marketing potential of that. But Mike didn't want to call it Omadorn 2. He just didn't feel the name was right, hence the name of Amarok being derived.
Yeah,
What
and
is
not even mentioning Tubular Bells on the cover, even though Tubular Bells is on the record calling it long, thin, metallic hanging tubes or something like that.
What might they be, I wonder?
what does the title Amarok mean?
And Mike himself said it doesn't mean anything. He said if pushed, maybe it kind of loosely resembles some Gaelic words for things like mourning or happy. But I think he was just sort of kind of grasping at ideas in an interview to find something to say. I don't think that's really what he thinks. I mean, he also mentioned that it sounds a bit like I am a rock, as in I don't change with trends. But I think that was just like an interview answer. I think genuinely it's just a bit of a nonsense word that sounded nice and in the same vein as Omadorn, just sounded a bit Gaelic and like the sound of it.
Do either of you feel it could have or should have been legitimately called Tubular Bells 2 or Amadon 2?
And definitely not. I mean, as Chris said, it's more closely related to Omadon, but then there are sections which are also like variations of themes from Tubular Bells, um, at least like 4 or 5 sections that are based on ideas from Tubular Bells. So I think it doesn't make any sense to call it, I mean, Amarok is I think it's a great title, like, and, you know, the fact that we don't know what it means makes it even better.
I think definitely not Tubular Bells too. I don't think there's enough in common with that. I think there's a lot in common with Omadorn. Not using that title, I think, was probably wise. But Tom did mention, actually, he said that there's a section in Amarok called Rachmaninoff, and he said that was done because they both felt Rachmaninoff was a little bit pompous in his presentation of music, and they made a little section that they felt was a bit overdone and pompous in that same vein, and it has more humor in it than Tubular Bells is a very kind of serious, well, generally a very serious record, but Amrock has got some more humor thrown in than Tubular Bells did, I feel. So I don't feel they sit together naturally as partners.
Well, ultimately, how do both of you feel this record holds together as a cohesive statement?
Well, it is cohesive, just because it is a record, you know, and the fact that it was presented as something that was sort of, I mean, made for CD, right? Like that was like um, transcending the idea to write for vinyl. I think that's really important to mention that already that idea makes it cohesive to me. Also, the fact that it's like this small team that worked on it makes it cohesive. It's the same composer writing all the parts. It's the same guy playing most of the parts, so it couldn't actually be more cohesive. And any decisions that were made for like stylistic variation, let's say, of the themes of the thematic material, that is just purely like play, I guess, like what they did. It was joyful. It is kind of as we said, humorous at times. It also like used these musique concrète ideas where things were like, like noisy, like in a way. Also some more atonal stuff, just short sections. And so in a way, also like the Hoover section makes an appearance, right? Which was part of the demos for Tubular Bells. And so to me, it's really just by definition, it's coherent.
I think it takes the listener a little while to realize that. I mean, I remember first time I listened to it, I was, despite being an enormous fan, I thought, what is this? I was a student in Germany, and I remember just seeing it in the record shop, and I hadn't heard anything about it, which was unusual. Having
Mm.
done all the
Mhm.
magazines all the years, I thought this is strange. Put
Mhm.
it on, and I was quite shocked. And it took me a few listens to get it and to understand that cohesiveness, because it's not immediately in your face. It's quite subtle in the way it's done, I think.
Yeah, I remember that with most albums of Mike's, I was able to learn the music in a way that I could audiate it. Was able to listen to it in my mind. Um, Still do that a lot with Taurus 2, for example, right? With Amarok, it was more abstract. Like I think this is really like one of the main features of the record, that in one sense it's more childish and simple and like harmonically simple and things like that, and like stylistically um, funny, right? But it's also extremely serious, and in a way it's sort of like it is these extremes that find, that are collected in this record. And that's why, for me, it was always difficult to really learn the whole thing. It's 60 minutes. To hold 60 minutes in your mind's eye is just really difficult. And again, that makes the whole composition even greater for me, because like starting at like minute 40 or something, Mike is starting to like recombine all the themes and just building things. And we know there are like three finales in this or something. So it was like I was able to remember every single thing, but I wasn't really able to follow the timeline properly for many years.
And I'm not a musician, but it feels like there are elements of it that have got to be really difficult to play, like real virtuosic playing in it. I mean,
Yeah,
this
very fast guitar playing. That was the time when his technique was the best,
mm,
really. Like when the reprise of the triplety guitar stuff that did on Omadon originally, and then he's never really gone back to that and then 15 years later he comes back playing these virtuosic electric guitar parts, but also the acoustic guitar parts. That's something that people don't realize, how amazing of a player he is on acoustic guitars. Just again, just the physical power needed in order to get that
mm.
tone. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like that, you go to work at 9 in the morning and you actually work hard. Like I wonder what his fingers must have felt like at the end of the day,
Is there anything either of you feel that doesn't work about this record?
Well, let me jump in. I don't like the Janet Brown Margaret Thatcher impersonation. I think a lot of Mike's music is timeless, and for me, that section really dates this album. And I know, I suppose that's fair enough, but it makes me cringe when it comes on. I don't like it. Um, it just grates with me. It's not my
Just
thing at all.
just to interject, why did he do that? Do we know?
I think he was just feeling mischievous, and there was obviously the political environment in the UK at the time. So Margaret Thatcher was very unpopular, and it was just at the time she was being thrown out of office, and he felt like making a statement about that. Yeah, absolutely fair enough, but I didn't feel it fit. I think Tom felt quite strongly against it as well. He was trying to encourage Mike not to put it in, but he's since kind of changed his mind and says, well, the impersonator was so good that it worked. But for me, it's it's just something I didn't. No, I'm no Margaret Thatcher fan, but I just didn't like that section.
Chris, what do you think of the text that she's reciting?
I think it's largely gibberish, like like a lot of Mike's lyrics. He's not a great lyricist, if we're honest. I think, and he just came up with some words. Maybe she came up with it. I don't know, but I don't think there's any significance. Maybe you've got different thoughts.
Well, first of all, I think it's a reference back to the original, the first version of Ramadan that he recorded, where he actually put the joke, I don't know what you call that. That's sort of like a very English uh, kind of form of a joke that we Germans don't understand. But anyway, it's sort of like reference back to that, I think. So it's clearly an Ramadan reference for me. And then the idea that endings are just beginnings um, is is kind of a nice in terms of like from an artist point of view. If you are an artist and you are sort of like in, as you said, in this situation, you're going to work every day and you're just like in a factory producing this music. Everything becomes the same. It's just like you're a worker rather than an artist. You're a craftsman. And in a way, this aspect, like especially like using Margaret Thatcher in that context, that voice sounding like Margaret Thatcher, I think is kind of, I mean, I don't want to say it's deep, but at least it could be very considerately an artistic statement, let's say. And I just like that with Mike's music or with anything about Mike, you can have these kind of theories. I know that they don't really, it's not really the truth, but it kind of like helps having these narratives to kind of like get into it and sort of listen to it from a different perspective. And I have to say that it used to bother me a lot also, that voiceover really. But nowadays I think it's just part of it, and I'm trying to enjoy it and trying to take from it like whatever vibe atmosphere it generates, and for me it's fine. It's fine. But like you are asking what we don't like about it. For me, it always was the flamenco bits. There's like one flamenco bit in particular, which is like again like playing wise, technically, it's insane, crazy, crazy playing, and like the when he's playing that flamenco riff on the Stratocaster with lots of compression. I don't. I'm sure you know which section I mean. It's so upfront. It's crazy, and but the musical that musical genre, let's say, is doesn't really work for me in the context of Amarok, where like Taurus 3 on Crisis is great. I think it really works very well within the flow of that album. And even on Jubal Bells 3, it kind of works. But here it's a little bit out of place. There's also that fast folk tune treatment of the themes with all sorts of mandolins and blah blah blah, and which I also didn't like that much at the time. But it's around the 20 minute mark, I think. But other than that, I think they're just like fantastic sound combinations that nobody else has ever done, like the African percussion with the glockenspiel, the vocoder, and the accordion, for example. It just has such a earthy, futuristic, like it's really like a representation of something that is so um, I don't know how to say it. Like the colors are just so rich, and I think it just makes it extremely special, this record.
Now, Chris, I understand you feel this album could have been improved had Tom Newman been more involved and perhaps been listened to more. Talk about his role and what transpired during the Amarok sessions in a little more depth.
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to that a bit earlier, that Tom was there all the time and he was kind of trying to stretch Mike, but Mike at times was resistant because naturally he had his own strong ideas. It was his album. But I think a producer can deliver great things. I don't want to go too off topic, but like you've got Return to Amadorn that came out, his last album. Obviously, he did that entirely on his own, and I think that suffers a little bit, but even though it's quite a raw output, in that there was nobody kind of on his shoulder saying, "Oh, but couldn't you just develop that idea a little bit?" And I think it's impossible to say this, isn't it? Because it's all hypothetical. But had Tom's voice been able to be a bit stronger and say, I think this could be stretched a little bit longer. Maybe you could mix this section with that section. So to have a stronger voice, even though his input was significant, then maybe it could have gone even further. I know it benefits from being that kind of raw output of, here's today's output, here we go, let's do it. First take and it's recorded and that's it done. There's a strength in that. But I also feel that maybe to a degree, with a little bit more planning, a little bit more input into encouraging a bit more of a stretch, that maybe it could have gone even further. I mean, that's an unfair thing to say because it's a brilliant piece of work.
Yeah, Chris, I was smiling because yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but it's so amazing.
Mm.
It's just such an amazing record, and also like I said, yeah, maybe no conscious planning, but there is a structure that is really strong, and I also believe that there is some sort of um, underlying structure that we don't really understand yet because nobody has explained to us what's happening. Like that's how composers usually work. They have some sort of external thing, something that inspires them. You look at um, like some board game, let's say, some board game, and then you build a piece of music that inspired by the board game. So you have like certain things that sit next to each other, and you work like that. And in a way, I think that this piece um, has some subconscious, as we were saying, subconscious structured or element that structures it that we don't really understand what it is.
It's a
And I'm
mystical
I
thing, isn't
don't
it?
it's mystical. It's mystical. But as I've said, the musical material that he's using here is much simpler than on his other records. So maybe that's where we find the um, what Tom refers to as laziness, right? Sometimes about Mike, right? And
Mm.
I think in the end, just by the way that they put this together, like it doesn't really matter, and like the lazier aspect of the chord sequences, let's say, makes it work that it's such a mosaic, because otherwise it would be. I mean, if I may say so, like even Tres Lunas, for example, is a record that people don't understand really well because it's also made out of parts that are meant like modules that are meant to work with each other for the game originally,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And in a way, this is like it's strange to make this reference between Amarok and Tres Lunas, but in a way, that's what's happening. That's what he started with Omadon. If we listen to the original version of Omadon, that one that's called the demo, which is like the first recording, you can see that he was still all the elements are there at all times. And for the real version, he stripped it down and it's much more linear. right? And in a way, Amarok is sort of like the midway point where things kind of happened because they had to happen, because he wanted to make a record, because he had to deliver something, you know, like also, like, I mean, maybe you know something about that, Chris, like the guitar sounds and like the everything, like technically has changed between Islands and Earth Moving, and then Earth Moving, um, the three records before Jewel Bells too, they have a very unique sound to them in terms of the equipment used and things, and that is also something that I, as a professional musician, sort of like wonder about, like what did this do, like or anyway, it's I could go on forever about this.
I mean, I can't answer technically. I
No,
don't know the
no,
ins and outs of that, but
yeah.
I mean, he certainly used to like buying new equipment all the time. He liked to be at the forefront of technology and equipment.
Mm,
So maybe there was
mm,
something in that, but I don't know. I'm just guessing there.
mm.
Well, Marcus, you are a trained psychologist in addition to being a musician. What do you feel Amarok reveals about Oldfield as a person?
Um, just that he's a genius. Like that's all I can say. Like I and like what does it reveal? I think like the information that Chris has given us today is, you know, is what we can know about his psychology. I think I think that the collaboration with Tom Newman was fantastic. It's something that uh, produced outstanding music, and I also believe that, not knowing them, I also believe that they didn't really understand each other, which maybe made the collaboration even better. And I think that's really what made it better, because there are like certainly two um, completely different points of view that kind of like meet. So it's not just 3 years listening to the music. It's actually 4 years, right, in the studio. And I think that's what I can learn from it. Also, like yeah, psychologically speaking, just the energy that Mike in his lifetime, and Amarok in particular, the work that he's put into his records is just crazy. Like I really don't know, or maybe you can give me examples for people who spend so much of their own energy, and I'm not just talking about the mental energy, also just the physical energy. Like we're saying, like all the playing, the hours and hours of playing that are like I don't know how many 500, 600 hours of playing that must have gone into this record. Um, that's I think that says a lot about Mike. The you could say it's obsessive compulsory behavior or compulsive behavior or something like that, or maybe it's just love for what he's doing. Even though he had to deliver, somehow you get into a trance as you're working and you create something that connects to the subconscious or whatever. Like I think it will always remain a mystery, really, how you know, like I mean, especially as a psychologist, I have kind of like stopped trying to understand people.
I think it's fair that Mike has always had clear vision of what he's doing with his projects. You know, they're also varied, they're also dynamically different. But he's also always had this clear idea in his head. The struggle, I think, for him has been to communicate that with other people. So he's not been able to express that in words. He just kind of instinctively knows this is what I want to do, and that's why he's spending so long recording these things. Because I mean, like 5 Miles Out, he famously said he spent 600 hours just recording that single. I mean, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but maybe that's just marketing. But you know, that level of detail and effort to reach that perfection of vision that he has in his head, I think is incredible. Yeah, I agree.
Well, Chris, as we um, also referred to at the beginning of this conversation, relationships were very, very frayed with Virgin at this point. Um, and as a result, Mr. Oldfield embedded a rather interesting message into the album. Tell us about that and why he did it.
Well, I think he saw it as a bit of a joke. I mean, he was frustrated with Richard Branson. You know, it was at a time where he felt his royalties weren't fair. If that's whether that's real or not, you know, it's difficult to say. I couldn't say what all the various contracts were with all the different artists they had. But I mentioned earlier that the staff at Virgin had kind of moved on, and they were interested in people like Phil Collins. Obviously, there'd been the Sex Pistols that had been a great cash cow for them, and they were more interested in those artists at that time. So he was frustrated, very frustrated and bitter. So 48 minutes in, if you listen carefully, there's an organ playing some stabs that spell out some Morse code that literally tell RB where to go. And it was undiscovered for a couple of years, but then one of our readers actually wrote in and said, "Oh, you know, have you heard this?" Of course, when I listened back, it became very clear. And we were just arranging an interview for a German chap called Thomas Rosenthal, who was a photographer in the 90s. He did a lot of photography, well, 80s and 90s, did a lot of photography of Mike. So we helped him set up an interview with Mike at a press conference, and he raised the question. He said, "Mike, does Richard Branson know about the Morse code message?" And he just fell about laughing. He just found it hilarious. Now he'd offered a £1,000 prize to whoever found it. Whether the chap Roy Rashbrook ever got it or not, I don't know. But he's the man who we have to give that credit for finding that.
Marcus, what did you make of that stunt?
Um, like I said, I mean, like composers, they use external inspiration, and you could take a telephone number, you can take Morse code. The fact that he put this message in there, um, yeah, I really, like I said, I have read Chris's book, which is wonderful, by the way. Um, like I have no understanding of the, say, the politics or the friendships or, like, you know, the industry at that time. Yeah, it's kind of, uh, to me, it's like this kind of thing can only be tongue in cheek, really. Especially if it's hidden in that way. It's that brass step doing it, and yeah, I think it's cool. It kind of like points to the fact that, like, while we believe that a lot of things were done subconsciously, I think m- there are a lot of things that were done consciously on this record as well. Not just this message.
Who knows? Maybe there's another one in there somewhere.
I'm sure. I'm actually sure.
Did you say there's another one in there?
No, no, I don't know. Just
Oh,
supposing.
okay.
Mhm.
So, Chris, when the record was finally delivered to Virgin, they hadn't a clue what to do with it. Talk about how the label responded and how they attempted to market it, and then also what Mike ended up having to do on his own as a result.
Well, they were baffled by it, and I think Mike probably consciously avoided putting a section in there that could be lifted and used as a single. He was that annoyed with Virgin. I think it was on purpose. So Virgin got it and thought, well, what do we do with this? And it just didn't fit their normal marketing, sort of patterns of what they do. And despite the fact they're very creative people that they had, I think they were just at a loss. And Mike then put some of his own money into it. He did a press launch at his house and invited people, laid on champagne and got canapes ordered. And one person turned up. It was the BBC DJ Bob Harris. He was the only person that came. Uh, so that didn't really work very well. He didn't have the connections. Uh, but then he put out a little mini CD. There's a news agent in Britain called W.H. Smith's, and they used to have a magazine that came out monthly with stuff in that about new products, and that came with a cover disc. And I want to remember the little 3-inch CDs that had some excerpts from Amarok on it, and you could trade that in for £1 off the CD if you bought it. So of course there are not many of those around anymore because everybody that wanted it traded it in. It's become quite a rarity, but that was paid for by Mike himself because of the difficulty that Virgin had in doing anything useful to market it. And it went on to be his worst selling album, which is a shame.
I did not know it was his worst selling album, but that doesn't surprise me
Well,
either. Do we know how
up
many
to that
copies?
point,
Do we know how many copies up to that point?
yeah.
Do we know how many copies Amarok sold?
I don't know the numbers. I mean, I've got in my head something like 100,000. I don't know where that comes from. That's probably made up, but no, I don't really know.
Now, I was very, very young when this record came out, so I don't actually know how the media responded to this record or even how fans responded when it came out in 1990. Do either of you have any recollections of its welcome at that time?
I remember that there were maybe a handful of articles in magazines. I do not remember music magazines, but I was too young. I wasn't reading music magazines back at that time. It was still something like I don't know how you call that, like magazines for teenagers, and uh, like as early as '82, I started collecting articles and like you know clipping them out of the magazines. And I remember there was one where, like the famous one, where he is with the Ovation guitar and sitting in front of the tent he set up in his garden. Um, but really, I only remember maybe a handful of press clippings from that time.
So I think those newspaper articles about him in the garden, well, in slumming it in his tent. He was in his luxury garden. He could walk in and use the toilet and make a cup of tea, couldn't he? It wasn't it wasn't really going back to basics, but that was a bit of a PR stunt, I think. In terms of the music press, I don't remember seeing very much about Amarok at the time, but since then there've been some quite niche interviews, and there was a really good one in the early 90s by a Dutch chap. His name was uh, Dick Spielpenning, and he did an article in a piece called Sim Info Pop, and it was a fantastic, really in-depth article, an interview about Amarok. Then Anil, of course, you did one a few years ago, and also talked to Mike about Amarok in more detail than most do. But there've only been a handful of those where people have really got Amarok, and I think that's key here. That it's never become mainstream because of its quirkiness, its eccentricity. There are only a select handful. And hello to all of you. You know, you'll all be watching this podcast. You're in that group. There's only a select number of people that get it, and because of that, it's not really made the mainstream press or media, I think.
Yeah, when I did speak to Mike, he did call it his very favorite album of his whole career. So, in retrospect, he thinks extremely highly of it. And in terms of its legacy, here in 2025, we still have musicians attempting to transcribe the record, create full-scale performances of it, do acoustic renditions of it. You can hear these things on YouTube and other parts of the internet and SoundCloud if you go digging. Marcus, what are your thoughts on the challenges inherent in trying to realize a live performance of this record?
Well, it's just very difficult, just because of the variety of sounds and the the level of musicianship required in order to play these parts, and especially also to play them in time with a bigger band. Like nowadays, yeah, with click tracks and in-ear monitoring, it's not impossible to do. But yeah, we shouldn't forget that in '78, Mike already did something crazy like that and went on tour with a 55-piece band. So it is possible, but somebody would have to really, I think, like Mike did with Tubular Bells and Incantations in the, at the for the '78 tour, Exposed tour, I guess it was called. Um, Something like that would have to happen, I think, in order to make it a really great live concert experience. I know there's a Spanish group called Fadalac, I think, and they do a fantastic job.
Mm.
I love their performance they put on, but they're trying to be authentic to the record, and ultimately that's not very exciting to me as a musician, I have to say. Like I want to hear a version that's truly live and that's not just trying to replicate the record. But anyway, like it is possible. Some people are trying to do it. There are some yeah, let's just say it like um, very dedicated individuals who also try to make versions of it. It's just doesn't work as well as a composition if it's not being if it's not being performed by a genius, let's say. I think this is very clearly something that Amarok, that like I said, the actual material is weaker than his other records, I would say. It's just the way it's been performed and presented that makes it so great. And yeah, that's why like any live performance would have to be a creative, how shall we say, um, creative adaptation of it.
There's a Spanish guy called Ruben Alvarez, and he plays with a band called Tubular Tribute, and he's done some excerpts from Amarok. For
Yeah,
me, they are done with the most passion and flair I've heard after Oldfield himself. I think he,
absolutely.
as a guitarist, is incredibly talented, and he does a very good rendition of Mike's music, but plays it with complete heartfelt passion. And for me, he's the closest that's come to doing an exciting live rendition of Amarok, even though it's only excerpts.
Yes, I agree.
So, Marcus, as a musician, what is the lasting impact of this record on your own musical psyche in terms of inspiring you to do interesting things?
Really, it's knowing that there's nothing that's impossible. But that can be said about all of Mike's output, really, but Amarok in particular. And like I said, Tom and Mike, they they created something that on the surface sounds like if you put down a project description, it sounds crazy and impossible, but they did it. And I think probably it was only possible because they didn't know what they were going to create. And if you knew before you started actually that you'd have to do all of this work, maybe you wouldn't even start. And that's sort of like how I feel. I have learned from Mike's biography in the sense that I have followed his path, and being a professional musician myself, I see how things are, what kind of processes can happen under the hood, psychologically, in terms of confidence about what one is doing, and I think Mike has always been sort of like I don't know what the English word for this is, but he's been sort of like the sort of a leader of a certain approach and trust in the creative process. And Chris, you mentioned that he's like drastically changed styles between albums, and he's a conceptual artist actually, which is something that hardly anybody really understands. Like,
Mm.
and I think that's what the impact on me is still, that I know I can make an ambient record, can make a jazz rock record, and I can make a record of ballads, and I can make a records of songs, of local songs in this within the same year. And I think a lot of my peers think of him that way, really, as somebody who is so inspirational that you can do anything you want. And in nowadays climate with yeah, the digital streaming services, and like where you really don't have to have a style that's you. It's just you have to be you, and that's what Mike really was showing to everybody, that you can be your own brand and you can do anything you want if you have a strong brand.
You've just reminded me of a little story actually. When Music of the Spheres came out, that was his classical album, came out in 2008. We had a meeting with the record executives after the Bilbao premiere, and this was the classical arm of Universal, and they asked us. They said, "Well, how do we get Mike to make another classical album? Because this has been great for us." And we just kind of sat there and said, if he doesn't want to do it, you can ask all you like. You don't stand a chance. He's not going to do something he doesn't want to. He's got to be motivated from within for whatever he fancies doing at the time. You asking him is not going to make any difference. He's not going to be driven by money. He's not going to be driven by the possibility of chart success. He just doesn't care about that. He wants to write what he wants to write, and that's that.
Well, Universal, who now controls the Mike Oldfield catalog, or most of it anyway, has chosen to celebrate the 35th anniversary in a rather curious way with a double LP vinyl edition that chops up this 60-minute continuous piece of music into four sides, allegedly with Oldfield's approval. What do you both make of this treatment?
I think you've answered the question in the way you asked it. It's been split into four. It's written as a 1 hour piece of music. Now you've got 3 interruptions in it. It's on a format that isn't best suited to Amarok, so it's got to be compressed to fit the dynamic levels within the grooves of the vinyl. Vinyl's not the right format for it. Then of course there's the travesty of the lettering that Tom Newman hand carved out of metal, that they've replaced with a terrible font rendition on the cover. Most people are saying they're disappointed with it and they're not going to buy it. I've had one person actually say that they quite like the 3 splits. They quite enjoy that because it gives them a time to digest what's happened before moving on to the next section. But he's the only single lone voice I've heard that has been saying anything positive about it, I'm afraid.
I mean, I can't really say much. I think it's fine, but I also agree to Chris's comments. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna buy it. I don't think I will. Um, what I kind of like is that, this music can still be should I say this? It's something that still has a life, even though, like we said, okay, it wasn't really successful or successful in the context of Mike's previous success at the time. I think it's a good sign that something's still being done with it. So trying to
Yeah,
be
it's not been
positive, trying to be
forgotten.
positive,
Yeah,
trying to be positive here.
yeah, that's true.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we have, I think, covered this album in extraordinarily detailed. This has been a great conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to provide on this record and its legacy and its impact?
Well, I think, like, listen to it. Like, people should listen to it. Also, other musicians need to listen to this. Like, this sets the bar so hard, the the bar so high. It's something that everybody needs to know this record. I really think so. And even if you only listen to it once, it's not going to be enough to listen to it once. I know that, but people need to understand that there is somebody out there, and this is something I keep saying to myself. Mike Oldfield, as far as we know, is still alive. Right? Like, this is like a person who's here on Earth who did this. And I think that's why people need to just forget about all the things they've heard about him, right? Or that what they think Mike Oldfield did or does or whatever, and just listen to that record and kind of like at least give it a try.
I can only echo that. Yeah, listen to it a few times. It needs a few times to get your head around it. What you're going to hear is Mike Oldfield really at almost his most raw. This is him kind of unadulterated with absolute virtuosity in his playing, showing his genius. And I think if you get Amarok, then you've got Mike Oldfield.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Anil.